Welcome to Season 2 of Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al, the podcast that brings you timely and practical stories straight from the paddock. From sowing to shearing, fire to flood, and everything in between. We're here when it matters most. Each episode taps into real experiences, expert voices, and grounded advice that helps you stay ahead on farm. I'm Alistair from the Gippsland Ag Group, a grassroots, farmer-led network in Gippsland, focusing on soil, grain and fodder, pasture and livestock. We're here to support producers in building resilient and profitable enterprises across our region. So let's dig in. Welcome to Digging Deeper. In the seat today we've got Chelsea here. How are you going, Chelsea?
I'm great, Al. It's great to be here again. Thanks as always.
Now I'll ask this question but probably already know the answer. Have you been busy lately?
Yeah, we've been absolutely flat out. I reckon this is the busiest couple of months we've had in the business since I started. So, yeah, I think that's just a combination of seasonal conditions, and we've sort of taken on a lot more work over the last year as well. So It has been really busy.
So more clients or more PDS, or what are you actually doing?
A bit of everything. We've just we've picked up a lot of work up around the high country. So been doing a lot of bull testing up around the Omeo and say Benambra region. And also the autumn calving cows are now rolling into a period where they need to be preg tested. And also we've got spring calving. So, and we've had a lot of calvings this year compared to previous years. And I don't even know if we can necessarily attribute that just to the business growing itself. I think speaking to a lot of producers, they're pulling a lot more calves and intervening a lot more than they have in previous years as well. So,
anecdotally, what do you think? Is it a condition score on the cows, or is the calves too big, or?
Not necessarily. That's the funny thing about it is certainly the calvings that Alison and myself have done. I don't think there's been any particular problem. I have seen some cattle that are a bit over-conditioned. We've seen a lot of twins, and speaking to other producers, like I've got clients that have got 50 or 60 cows and they've had 8 sets of twins. So some of them require intervention because they're more likely to get tangled up. But yeah, otherwise it's just been your average sort of malpresentation type things and nothing in particular. We have had some abortions where heifers just didn't dilate correctly, and so we've had to go out and do episiotomies and things like that to help give the heifers a bit more room to carve their cows out. And it's not that the pelvis is too small or the calf is too big. What's
episiotomy? Is that sounds like is it cutting something?
Yes, that's where you make an incision through the vulva to sort of stop the calf from tearing the cow as they're passed through the vaginal canal. So the reason we often do that is so they don't tear into their rectum. So if you make a tear in a place you can stitch it back up, it means that the likelihood of them tearing somewhere you don't want them to tear is a lot less likely. So
you'll see a calf trying to get out. Is that what you see when you get there, and it's just no chance it's going to fit out?
Sometimes we've had a couple where everything's presenting normally. There's 2 feet and a head sitting there, but they're not even the feet aren't even coming out because they've dilated that poorly in the vulva that nothing's actually coming out. So the other thing that we can see occasionally where people say, oh, they're sort of pushing but nothing's showing is a twisted uterus. So that's where the uterus twists onto itself.
Yeah, so the calf stuck further down before the birth canal.
Yeah, correct. And because the cervix twists, it's got this corkscrew effect, so nothing comes out. So that's something we've been seeing a little bit of as well, and lots of breaches as well. So just coming tail first with no legs. So you'll obviously see nothing coming out of those also. So yeah, it's been a big sort of mixed bag of different things that we've had to go and address. So
right. Well, if there's any training vets that are looking for a job, it sounds like Herd Solutions might be just about to hire. So we'll actually move on with our planned podcast today, and that's actually all about pre-joining and bull conditions and ram conditions and different treatments that we need to be looking for or assessments that we need to be doing. Firstly, ideal body condition score for a bull going out.
Yeah, so that's actually something we've seen a lot of because it was a pretty harsh winter. we're seeing a lot of bulls present for routine bull testing, and they're in very poor condition just because seasonal conditions over winter did mean that a lot of animals did do it pretty tough, and just with prices of supplementary feeds as well, has made some pretty challenging environments. And I think a lot of people probably put all their effort into keeping the cows ticking over because they're right in front of you and you're seeing them every day, and they're feeding calves, so they're the immediate profit driver, so it makes sense to feed them. And unfortunately, sometimes I think bulls probably get put on the back burner over winter a little bit compared to cows. And what happens is by the time we go out to bull test them, which is usually around about now, especially because there still isn't much feed on the ground, we're seeing a lot of bulls in poor body condition score.
So biggest issue with a low BMI? Not BMI, that's humans. BCS, isn't it?
BCS, yes. So it's sort of twofold. The first, to answer your question, obviously, we want them in a body condition score of sort of 3.5 at the start of joining. The reason for that is because we expect them to lose weight during the joining period. So, these are animals that are what we would consider athletes. They're working really hard for that couple of the months of the year that we actually need them on the farm. So, we want them in a forward body condition at the start of joining because we expect them to lose weight just working so hard through that joining period. And
chasing the girls around?
Yeah, that's right. They're out there working all day, every day. And so, we don't want them coming out below a body condition score 2.5 at the end of joining. So it's something that we're really trying to urge people to start thinking about now because, we don't want them piling all that weight on right before joining. It needs to be a sustainable increase in body condition, and just to think about having some pasture allocated to them or supplementary feeding if you haven't had any sort of break in a season, because what we do see is that the animals that are well fed through winter, they're in a body condition score 3.5 to 4 when we go to do the semen test. They just produce much better looking semen under the microscope than the bulls that are in that body condition score of 2. And
right, so interesting sentence you just said. Much better looking semen. What looks good? Is it how the number, the size and shape? Yeah.
So when we go and look at semen crush side on farm, we'll evaluate it for several different parameters. So we'll record the colour of it. So that's just what it looks like grossly. And, we'll check it for any signs of pus and, lumps that might indicate an infection. And, obviously the more dense it looks to the naked eye, the more likely it is that there's going to be more sperm per dose as well. So we'll make an assessment under the microscope as well on how dense that undiluted sample looks and how much it's swirling around under the microscope as just a blob of semen, and we call that mass activity. And then what we do is we dilute it in some saline, and we assess it for how many of them are progressively motile. So it's not simply good enough for the sperm to be swimming. They actually have to go in a straight line. So that's what we refer to as the progressive motile sperm. And the sort of requirements is that for them to be a pass, it has to be at least 60%. And with the Cattle Vets Association your recording guidelines, we give them what's called a Q, which stands for qualified, if they're between 30 and 60%. So the Q indicates that they're not a clear tick, but they, if you put them out with cows, they probably will still get some cows pregnant, but not to the capacity that we would expect from an animal working in a commercial environment.
So that test, you think that's a high correlation with body condition score with poor semen? Yeah,
certainly it's not the only thing that matters. But yeah, animals that are in good body condition, we're just saying as a general trend, if they're in poorer body condition, they're producing more dilute samples that are of lower progressive motility than bulls that have been kept in really good condition over the winter. And the other thing to think about is that when we look at sperm in any sort of standalone period of time, it's the reflection of the health of that animal over the 7 weeks prior.
I was going to mention, because from memory, rams about 6 weeks from start of production of sperm to actually them using it. So what you were saying before is that progression of good nutrition is really important, at least 7 weeks.
Yeah, correct.
Prior.
6 to 7, depending on which academic you speak to. But generally around the 7 week mark. And so, even if you just give them good feed for a week prior to doing a bull test, it may still not have adequate quality in the semen because it's a reflection of the 7 weeks prior. So
So if we have limited pasture supply, what's a good feed supplement for bulls bringing up to joining?
Once they're fully grown, they don't need huge amounts of pellets or anything like that to keep them ticking over. A good quality hay or silage, just so that they don't lose that condition in the first place, is often all that they need to just keep them from falling completely below that threshold of a body condition score 2. And then as time goes on, particularly around now, the grass should start growing if we get a bit more rain in the preceding weeks, and hopefully, there will be enough pasture coming up to sustain them. But over winter, it's just a matter of maintaining them in that adequate condition so they don't lose it. And as I said, I think sometimes the bulls, because they're only used for a very small space of time in the year, when they're not being used and they're not being thought about, they're probably not given as much of a focus as the cows, because the cows are obviously feeding a calf, and I can understand that. But it does make it hard for us when we go out to semen test, and we've got to troubleshoot bad semen quality and sometimes go and recheck them and things like that. So
I think it'd be you forget about your bulls out the back. It's not really so much of a cost thing, because if you do the numbers with lower conception rates, it would definitely be worthwhile spending a bit of money on feeding those animals. But just got to remember about the poor old fellas. So.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so you mentioned before that over that 6 to 8 week sort of joining period, one condition score is an acceptable amount to lose for the bulls?
Yeah, that's right. So as I said, we would expect them to lose weight during the joining period. When alarm bells probably would start to ring is if we're pulling them out and they're below a condition score 2. And really 2.5, if we can keep them at that level, would be preferable, but 2's sort of the alarm bells ringing type thing.
Righto, so this might actually influence some of the body condition score. It points on feet and leg soundness exam, so what do we want to be doing before they go out, and how long before?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, because a lot of the bulls that we actually pull out of bull herds are because of structural issues. So one thing that I see a lot is, I was going to say older bulls, but sometimes even, I did some bulls last week and they were the year U, so that makes them, I think, 3-year-old. And some of them had already blown hocks as well. So that can sometimes be, if there's a bit of instability when they are mounting a cow, they can blow out a collateral ligament. So that's the ligament that holds the tibia to the femur. And so there's not meant to be lateral movement in that joint, but if they're a bit unstable on their back end, we can get collateral ligament issues. The other thing that pops up occasionally, which is really tricky to diagnose in field conditions, but there is a heritable condition called osteochondrosis, which is where we've got subfunctional cartilage deposition. And they can cause what's called like these little holes in the cartilage in the joints, and that can be heritable as well. So those young bulls and even older bulls that are starting to show signs of hock swelling is a really common reason we'll fail them on the physical exam component. And sometimes they're even quite lame when we even turn up to test them as well. So the other thing we see a lot of as well is, particularly as bulls get bigger, is that those cracks that start to form start to buckle just under the pressure of a fully grown, 1,100 kilo animal. So we see a lot of vertical cracks that will try and encourage people to not retain those bulls, because those vertical cracks in some settings can actually be heritable as well.
So if you're keeping the heifer portion out of them.
Yeah, so we might even just say, look, we can use this bull, but try and use it as a terminal sire rather than and put it over some cows that you're not expecting to keep heifers out of, so that we don't end up with more heifers in the herd, because those vertical cracks in particular are really hard to manage once they're there. So if we can try and steer away from breeding those animals, that's always preferable.
Are they generally a front foot thing, or is it any?
No, any foot.
Yeah.
Any foot. The other thing that we see a lot in older bulls as well is these things called corns, and they're these little lumps that pop up between the two claws, and they can start to abscessate and get infected as bulls get older as well. And sometimes they're just a wear and tear thing, so they pop up because there's excessive movement between the two claws. So if there's a subtle orthopedic issue going on, they will form, and then they rupture and bleed and get quite painful, and they attract things like foot rot bacteria, which cause dramas. So we pull a lot of bulls out for those as well. And particularly over the years, I've seen enough bulls that have broken down so badly that it's a real uphill battle once we get called out to even just get them, okay enough to put them on a truck. So I really try and sort of encourage people to try and move them on sooner rather than later now, because to my way of thinking, it's probably better to sell that animal for something than have to euthanize it on farm because it's completely crippled and not fit for transport. So if we can try and turn those bulls over quicker, I think that's a better economic outcome than just waiting and seeing what happens.
Yeah, so if we got the bulls in the yard for some reason, should we be picking up feet, doing an inspection?
I think even just looking at the feet in the yards, you don't even need to pick the feet up a lot of the time to see these problems. They're quite obvious just looking at them. And yeah, I would always try and recommend moving them on sooner rather than later, just because they're such heavy animals that are carrying around so much weight, and they're just such a ticking time bomb to get worse. And if you wait until they get serious lameness, sometimes when they're, because they're not the smartest animals at times either, bulls, they don't have the best sense of self-preservation. And once they get injured, they can be really tricky to get them sorted, because I've seen it happen quite a lot where, you'll pull a bull out because it's hurt itself, and, it'll just go through fences and do whatever it wants, even though it's injured anyways, and it's still not fit to load. But yeah, they aren't very good patients is probably a nice way of putting it.
All that testosterone maybe. What about vaccinations and any drenching?
Yeah, so we always recommend doing Vibrio vaccination at the time of bull testing, and so we'll often supply that to clients when we attend the farms as well. And it's a good time to do a booster for pestivirus as well. So I know, you just speak to 10 different consultants and you'll get 10 different answers on what's the best PestiGuard program to use from an economic perspective. But I think regardless of who you speak to, they'll say doing the bulls is a worthwhile investment, because bulls going from cow to cow, if they're going to catch something like pesty, they're going to be the animals that are going to spread it through the whole herd. So having them vaccinated for Vibrio and pesty is pretty essential. And the other thing to be aware of is to have some leeway in your program, I think, so that you're only doing 2 vaccines as a pre-joining booster as well. So we don't want to add a 7-in-1 into that mix as well. We always try and put the limit on 2 vaccination products, because otherwise the immune system can just get too overloaded with antigens to respond to in one yarding. And I don't think it's necessarily... Sometimes it does harm the bull, but more commonly I wonder if we're getting like a subpar immune response to each individual pathogen because we're just asking too much of that individual's immune system.
Yeah, so at a different time of yarding, you would give them like the 7-in-1.
Yeah, that's right. So if you can at least give them, a 2-month gap between your 7-in-1 and doing your pesty and your Vibrio together, I think that's going to be a better outcome, just to prevent the bull having any adverse effects, and also, as I said, to make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck out of actually giving those vaccines as well.
Yeah, now I've never owned a bull before. Can you talk about Vibrio briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. So Vibrio is a sexually transmitted disease, and it is a bacteria that likes to live in the preputial folds around a bull's penis. So the prepuce is the dangly bit of skin that you often see they're just standing there hanging it out from time to time. So the bacteria like to live there. You can't see it, and it causes no health issues to the bull. But what happens is when that bull serves a cow that hasn't got any sort of immune system to that pathogen, is that we get early embryonic death. So quite often it will manifest with a sudden and very unexpected reduction in pregnancy rate at the time of preg testing. It can also cause late stage abortion, and most of the time if a cow catches it, they will not get pregnant, but most of the time they clear that infection. But occasionally we can also get cows establish themselves in a herd as being like a chronic infection to the herd as well. So they have it living in their cervix for an extended period of time, and those cows can even continue getting pregnant. So it's very difficult to identify which of those cows they are, because they can still get pregnant, and also, you know, if they get pregnant, you're not going to see any signs on that cow also, because it doesn't actually make them unwell, apart from that handful of cows that suffer a late-term abortion. So the best and easiest, prevention and control strategy is to vaccinate your bulls every single year. The other thing we usually advise people to do is buy virgin bulls as well. So bulls that we know haven't been used on other people's cows, because that's going to reduce the likelihood, obviously, that a bull is carrying it as well. So trader heifers are a bit of a biosecurity risk for that reason as well, because often heifers, if you don't know whether they've been joined before, you know, if they're somebody's cull empty heifers, it may be because they were carrying Vibrio. So we often see it come into a farm that way as well. So look, vaccination's not a silver bullet. You can still get cases and you can get breakthroughs despite vaccinating, but it's certainly a lot better than doing nothing at all. So,
yep. Is there a test we can do to see if the cow's got Vibrio? Yeah,
so we have to do a vaginal mucus ELISA on the cows. Unfortunately, we still don't have... What would be lovely is obviously if we could have a reliable PCR test so we can identify which bulls have got it and just remove those from the herd. Unfortunately, we don't have tests that are adequately sensitive or specific for Vibrio, because we can get false positives and false negatives, because there's a lot of bacteria that live around the bull's penis that are actually very similar from a microbiology perspective to the Vibrio. So we'll get false positives in bulls that actually don't have it. So that's obviously a bit of a problem. So treating the bulls is not super straightforward. It can be done. It involves usually administration of antibiotics in a blanket fashion to the bull mob if we know that there's a problem, but it can take a while and a few years to get the system right again once we've diagnosed it. So that's why vaccinating and having good biosecurity is better than not having to deal with it in the first place.
All right, well, let's look at some nutrition around bulls. You just said as long as we keep a condition on, that's all right, so we don't have to worry so much about protein or ME?
We certainly do, but, they certainly don't have the protein and metabolizable energy, requirements compared to a lactating cow or anything like that. It's not that, it's not that their energy requirements are really extreme. What I think happens more often is, like I said, it's just that they usually are the first animals to sort of do it tough over winter, and then you're sort of playing catch up to get the weight back on them at the start of spring. So, a good quality hay or silage is fine to keep a bull ticking over, as long as there's the feed volume there to keep them full and keep them from losing that body condition in the first place.
What about any management or groups of bulls leading up to joining? Is there any sort of recommendations with sort of behavioural with the bulls, or is it everyone just keeps them all together and then they get split into their individual mobs, or should you separate them into the mobs that they're going to go out before joining?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Every time and it goes for cows as well, every time you put them in a different group, there is going to be a period where they reset their social hierarchy, and it's actually I think a very overlooked component of animal behaviour and animal management in general. And so, having your bull groups, well established long before joining, and having them in those groups, several weeks out from joining, so that they can, get that social hierarchy sorted before putting them out with the cows is really, really important. Because you might think that, if they're in the paddock together, even though there's other bulls, it won't make any difference because you're just splitting them off into different places. But once you take a proportion out, the social hierarchy can change.
There's got to be a new boss for that smaller group.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, a sort of unrelated topic, but something I learnt recently was a similar thing for actually sending animals to the abattoir. The same sort of principle applies, that if you've got 400 animals and you only want to sell 100 to your abattoir, actually getting that 100 out and having them in an established social group prior to sending them can actually substantially reduce your number of dark cutters by the time they get to the plant. So yeah, it's an often overlooked component of social management for these animals, because I hear about it all the time that people put their bulls out and they just spend the whole time fighting instead of actually getting on with the job. And maybe I think there is a bit of work out there being done on keeping age groups reasonably similar also, because sometimes you can get a lot of issues if you've got very old bulls and very young bulls, that the younger bulls will obviously get belted around a lot more also. So if we can have a reasonably uniform sort of age group, sometimes that can be beneficial as well if we've got very young bulls out.
What about bull ratios to cows? And does paddock actual physical size play a part in that? Yeah,
so the general rule of thumb is 1 bull per 50 animals, but if you're in a really extensive area, sometimes you need more than that to cover them adequately if there's a lot of spatial distance between stock. And I think also, making sure you've got a couple of spares, maybe not necessarily joining, but just in a separate paddock, because there is inevitably going to be breakdowns and fights and things like that. So having something you can substitute in if you absolutely have to. Every producer I've spoken to has got slightly different ways of managing joining. Like, I've got some clients that'll put one group of bulls in for 2 weeks and then they'll pull them out, give them a rest, and put another group of bulls in, just so that you've always got fresh bulls that are up to the job in there the whole time. And I don't think that's the bad way to do it, as long as the groups are stable, is probably the biggest thing, so that there's no social hierarchy changes is the biggest thing.
All right, now without diving too deep into EBVs, selecting bulls for different classes of cows or heifers, what quick recommendations have you got in that regard?
I think that depends entirely on what your breeding objectives are and what sort of market you're going to supply. And I'm certainly not an expert in this field like my boss is, but I think a lot of it comes down to I've got some clients that they mainly select for calving ease because they're at a stage in their life where they don't want to be out pulling calves at all hours of the night. But there is then trade-offs with your calf size, which can then have trade-offs with your mature body weight and things like that. So it depends entirely on what you're trying to achieve and what market you're trying to supply to. The other thing that we sort of do see occasionally is that in chasing really high finishing weights, that we don't let the mature cow size slip too high, because if the going gets tough, feed availability wise, then we end up with these really big animals that cost a lot more to feed through a drought than smaller animals. So that is probably one thing I would say we do see and tell people to sort of keep an eye on, is that their mature cow weight doesn't get too high, so that you still got a small compact animal to feed through the winter.
Any more on the bulls that you can think of before we move over into a less favourite topic?
Probably one thing I would say is a lesser known about test that we can perform is morphology testing for bulls as well. So when we come out and do our bull testing, we'll give them a physical exam. So that involves feeling their testicles for any abnormalities, doing a rectal exam to check the prostate, seminal vesicles and the other, secondary sex structures. And, we check the penis as well when we collect the semen sample. But one thing we can also do, because we just look at it from a motility perspective, and how much semen is there, crush side, there is a test called Morphology, which is where we send the semen away and the semen gets looked at under a higher magnification. So a semen morphologist will look at each individual sperm and look for defects, because there is a lot of defects that can impact sperm that don't impact its ability to swim. So we won't pick them up crush side, but they're still there and they can seriously affect conception. So it's a relatively inexpensive test, and I don't necessarily advocate that every animal needs it every single year. But one thing we see happen a lot is people that are really trying to push the envelope for putting younger bulls out, fairly soon after puberty, and they can still have a defect called proximal droplets, and this won't affect the sperm's ability to swim, but it will lead to a pretty dysfunctional embryo if one of those poor quality semen, sperm cells actually fertilises the eggs. So what often happens is the embryo lasts for a few days, but then it dies. So we see that quite often with, 13 to 14-month-old bulls that people often want to put out to mop up an AI program or put out over their heifers. And, those bulls just haven't fully gone through puberty in its entirety. So we can test those bulls 2 or 3 months later and they're fine.
Yeah, so it's just literally a timing thing. It's not... Yeah,
that's right. And so, going back to last year when we did a lot of semen testing of young bulls, it was quite disheartening because we would pull up to 50% of them just based on morphology. But it's still better than not knowing, because we've certainly seen cases where, we've got preg testing results where, it's not a train wreck, but still a third of the heifers haven't got pregnant. And, we do tests on the heifers for Vibrio and Pesty and things like that. And then we test the bulls. And it's actually that the bulls have got proximal droplets and they just haven't had enough time to finish puberty. So
if that was the case with those bulls, would you go back and retest, or just literally that extra year would be enough, or would you want to test those bulls again?
In some cases, what we have done is we've gone back. It's only a couple of months, and sometimes you might get another, half of them again that you've failed. Every animal's going to finish its puberty slightly different, no different to people. Some of them we've gone out a year later and they're fine. It's just one of those things where for young bulls, it's a pretty essential thing to know that the morphology is okay, because we just can't see that specific problem crush side, and we need that morphology test to have that confidence in those very young bulls. The other end of the spectrum is the very old bulls start to get those types of problems also. So, when we're talking, sort of 6 years or over, we'd certainly recommend doing it for those bulls as well. Between the ages of 3 and 6, in my experience, we don't often find any major dramas. But having said that, if you're single sire mating, I think morphology becomes pretty essential as well, because if you're putting all your eggs in that one basket, you need to be certain that that basket's working pretty well. So anyone that's single sire mates also, I think, should have morphology done. And actually something we've seen pop up a little bit also is bulls that have been sick. So, they've had a severe interruption in their sperm cycle because there's been some sort of illness. So something like a tyleria, pneumonia, woody tongue's also one I've seen recently. And, checking that the semen's working after a disease event also, because, as I said, it can be that 7 to 8 week lag after apparent resolution. And, it's just something that I think a lot of people still don't know is even there as an option. And, it's something every time I go bull testing, we'll have a discussion about whether we want to do it or on all of the bulls or a subset of the bulls. But it is a very handy test to give that extra bit of, reassurance that the bull's up to the job.
Yeah. All right. over to the rams. Now, just a disclaimer, Chelsea says, I don't think I've ever been called out for a ram test in the Gippsland area.
In my career.
In your career?
No. We certainly, when I was a student, we got shown how to collect them. But, yeah, in the jobs I've had, it's just not something that, we've been called to. I'm sure there's sheep vets out there that do it as part of their day-to-day, but certainly not around here anyways.
No, so it might not be as scientific, but just more general things. But a lot of them just actually overlap with the bull side of things. So we'll go through body condition scores for the rams. What's your guess? Pretty
similar to bulls. So I'd say a 3.5 at the start of joining.
Yep, and they will lose significant amount of weight. They're chasing each other around, and then when they start fighting, you just about know they're done actually. So. It's about to pull them out. And what are most people around this area? Do you know what they're joining at? Is it about a 5-week for the rams, or
5 to 6 is what I hear? Yeah, anecdotally, That sounds pretty spot on.
Now, feet similar to the bulls, where we inspected those feet. What else are we expecting if you were recall back to your uni days, Charles? What would you be told in the textbooks to be inspecting?
Yeah, we'd also probably want to check their teeth. And actually that goes for bulls too, particularly very old bulls, very old rams.
Stop talking about your bulls. Back onto the rams.
But yeah, making sure they still have teeth with older animals as well, just because, even with a break-in season, if they don't have incisors to eat the feed they need, then, they're going to struggle to maintain any sort of body condition. So the other thing is having a feel of the testicles as well.
What are we actually palpating, I think is the right word, isn't
Correct,
it? Yeah. What are we actually feeling for?
The main thing would be any signs of adhesions or nodules in the testicles themselves. So we do still have a bit of brucellosis in the country. And something I actually learned only a few days ago on a Facebook post, but apparently there is a bit of a syndrome with teaser rams as well, where they can develop these sort of granulomatous lumps in their testicles, and often they're quite benign lumps, probably because they've had their vasectomy procedure done. So, that spermy stuff has to go somewhere, and sometimes it can cause lumps in the testicles quite often also. So
is that not necessarily a brucellosis thing?
Not necessarily, no. And this is going off what colleagues have said, that, sometimes, often they test negative to brucellosis, and it's probably just, granulomatous reaction to the fact that they've been vasectomised over time. So.
Yeah. And similar to the bulls, that we want to actually be looking after those rams, not just popping them out the back in the ram paddock, but keep that nutrition up to them, because at least 6 weeks before is when that sperm production starts. The other interesting thing I was told recently is that we really shouldn't be just doing it 6 weeks before, because if we do have a few rams or bulls that aren't working, 6 weeks is a very short time frame to organise replacements too. So
yeah, that's right. And the other thing I would say, and this again goes for rams and for bulls, is you don't want to go to a bull or a ram sale and then just tip it out with your cows and sheep the next day. You want to give them some time to acclimatise to your new property and settle in, because there's going to be a huge stress response to being trucked and shifted to a new property and being put in with a new mob of animals. So, you need to just plan it well in advance so that you're not scrounging for replacements at the last minute.
Yeah. What about vaccines and drenching for the rams?
Yeah, so
anything specific apart from your 5-in-1 and worm drench, a decent worm drench that works on your property?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I don't know either, so hopefully there's not something I haven't been doing. But
yeah, no, certainly speaking to people that we work with, I haven't heard of anyone doing anything in particular. I think it's just, as always, a case of making sure that the drenches that you're using are appropriate for your property. And especially, I think, for rams, what they do have in common with bulls is often they are just set stocked in their own paddock elsewhere on the property, and so that risk of worms is probably a lot higher because they're not on some sort of rotation of pasture where there's some environmental risk management to larvae ingestion with your rams, because often they are sort of set stocked in their own spot. Yeah,
it's an interesting thought, because we're looking at a few drench resistance programs going around the district at the minute, and some things are popping up again unexpectedly. And when you think about it, the rams are a perfect sort of carrier of some drench resistance. You said they're set stock for sort of 8 months of the year, 9 months of the year in one paddock. They build up a good resistance in there, and then they get spread out to the whole farm to drop these resistant eggs everywhere. So drenching them like a week before would possibly a good practice before they go out, rather than just a couple of days, I guess. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, they might be a good sentinel, I guess, for, you could even do a post-worm worm egg count as well, just to see what that resistance level's doing, because they're likely to be reinfected, and sort of that canary in the coal mine sort of effect as well. So,
yeah. Now, this is probably a bit of a off-the-cuff question, but what about shearing before joining? Have you got any thoughts on that, or is it something we're going to have to do a bit of research on?
I'd certainly have to do some research on that, Al. It's not something I've ever been asked.
Not only the stress of shearing, but also the sedative that you use. Some people think that is not great for sperm production as well. So
no, and I'd believe that, certainly. That things like drugs will definitely have an impact for sure. So. But I wouldn't know to what extent, but that's a good point.
We got more questions out of this segment than answers for you, sorry, at the minute, but we will get back to it. Now, social grouping for rams before joining, similar case to the bulls, you think?
Yeah, from my experience, which admittedly is limited, then yes, I would tend to agree. Being social animals, you need to sort of keep that herd dynamic in mind, I think, when picking groups and things like that. So
yeah. And the last one, ram to ewe ratios off the top of your head?
Oh, God.
We'll test you here, because I've got an idea, but...
Yeah, and it'd change, I imagine. And I actually did write a newsletter on this recently, but if you're using teasers, obviously, as well, you need a lot more ram power to, get your synchronised animals all serviced at the same time.
Yeah,
but the numbers have fallen out of my head, to be honest.
Yeah, just quickly for the listeners... Teaser rams are vasectomised rams, so they still have all the pheromones, all the desire. They'll actually bring everything closer to on heat, won't they? So when the rams go out, you get a much tighter joining to the purpose of the teaser rams, and hence there'll be more ewes cycling when those working rams go out, so you need higher ratios. But I think in the merinos, it's about 2.5 to 3%, and they say +1 normally.
Yeah.
In the crossbreds, it's a bit less, down to sort of 2%. And I've actually done a joining at 1%, so 1 ram per 100 sheep. And in our smaller paddock here at the research farm, we had really good scanning rates, so it wasn't an issue. But that is, from what I understand, really pushing the envelope. And if you have a ram breakdown or two, then you're going to be in a bit of strife at those numbers. So do so at your own risk. And someone said to me recently, why would you do that? Because rams are some of the cheapest animals for what they do, so which is a fair point, but sometimes we do get stuck and like to push things a bit. But there you go. All right, nothing else on the ram side of things? You haven't been super helpful on the rams, I must say, today, Charles.
No. We just don't get asked about them that often. So when you're not being questioned about it, you just you don't.
No, it's pretty straightforward, and I think if you can use a lot of that bull, all the stuff we talked about with the bulls anyway, go across to the rams quite easily anyway.
Yeah, that's right. It's and I think you don't even need a vet to come out and check their feet and their joints and things like that, and their mouths, to make sure all those little things are in order. I think that's something a lot of producers could do themselves, and it's not hard to do. Just to tip out those ones that aren't worth having around. So,
I'd love to get some feedback on this though. If there's something that you do on farm with your bulls or your rams that we haven't mentioned, please let us know via email or on our socials, because it would be interesting to see what people and producers do on farms that just through experience on their own property. I would love to hear some comments, I reckon. Now, Charles, you're not going to get away with it that easy though. Got one more question to go. Have you thought of it?
No, and I just remembered halfway through, I was like, I've forgotten what Al was going to ask me. Sorry, I forgot to pre-plan my answer this time. No,
so it's no excuses. I'll ask it anyway. So what is something you've learnt in the last month that surprised you?
Give me a tick.
Yeah, go for it.
I've got one. I just learnt it, actually.
Go, tell us.
So I've been at the Youth Agritech Expo here today, and I was sitting at the Dairy Australia stand with local producer Rowan Reynolds, and he was really pushing the kids to ask him an inciting question before they could get their little piece of paper signed off and get like their little rubber cow.
Yeah.
And one of the students comes up and she goes, "Oh, how many dairy cows are there in Bairnsdale?" And he said, "Oh, I actually know the answer to this. It's 6,500.
Right.
And I was actually quite shocked that there was that many. And when I sort of did the maths in my head of like the producers that we service, probably is up there, but we just don't really think of Bairnsdale as being this massive dairy region. But to me, that was quite a high number for the number of farms that we've got. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, well, I couldn't even name probably 4 dairies around here, but you go down somewhere like South Gippsland and there's 4 dairies on every road sort of thing.
Yeah, so there was the lady at the Gips Dairy stand, I think she said there was 900 dairy farms in Gippsland as a whole.
Right.
So it's still a strong industry.
Massive. There you go. Well, that was a good one on such short notice. So thank you, Chelsea, for coming in.
No worries.
I hope your week slows down a little bit and you get some time to do the bookwork.
Thanks, Al.
Right, bye for now. A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.